Hola. Okay. Bad Boys 3. Look at that. Magic owl like it. Yeah, Bad Boys 3 or Bad Boys for Life. I think this defines the phrase mixed bag when it comes to films. It's not terrible. It's not good either, really. It's kind of competent. I think competent's a good word for it. So, Will Smith is back. Martin Lawrence is back. Joey Pantoliano's back. Michael Bay is not back, at least not as director. This is credited to being directed by two guys, only using their first name. I think it was Bilal and Adil. And I did a quick Google, and apparently these two guys are well, their next film is going to be directing Beverly Hills Cop 4. So it looks like these guys are going to try and make a name for themselves in Hollywood by reviving franchises from years gone by. Okay, so without spoiling it, really, there is a tonal imbalance with this film. So on one hand, it wants to be a Bad Boys film, which is obviously, it has its roots back in the 90s. I think it was 96 for the first one. And it's kind of, the first film is a typical Bruckheimer, Simpson produced action film. You know, it's all style, very little substance, flashy, energetic, fast-paced, etc., etc. It's interesting, actually. This one is credited as being a Don Simpson, Jerry Bruckheimer production as well, despite the fact that Don Simpson died in like 96, if I remember rightly. So, you know, he's been dead pretty much as long as this franchise has been going. Anyway, I digress. Yeah, so Michael Bay's not come back as director, and that's kind of a good thing and a bad thing, because well, look, I went into this film with an extremely low bar, low expectations for this film, because I've said it before, I enjoyed the first Bad Boys film. I thought it was good. It's probably, I'd say it's one of the most memorable kind of action comedies of the 90s, because it essentially made a star of Will Smith. That was like it's kind of hailed as been his transition from being the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air to being this movie star. That was the film that kind of kick-started his movie career. The second one, however, was typical Michael Bay. If anyone was paying attention to the Transformers films, who had seen his follow-up to the first Bad Boy, I mean, he directed the first two, then you should have known what was coming with Transformers films. Overlong, bloated, very flashy, granted, good looking stylistically, but bloated, overlong, convoluted, and kind of a little bit childish with the humour and all that kind of stuff. Typical Bayisms that he puts in all of his films. And I think that film was like knocking on the door of 3 hours, if I remember rightly. I mean, the only thing that was kind of memorable about that film was like the highway chase, the freeway chase, where, you know, Mike and Marcus are in a Ferrari chasing after the bad guys, and then you've got they're dropping cars off this lorry that the bad guys are on, and they're flipping over and going over. Say what you want about Michael Bay, he can put an action scene together. I mean, he may over rely on the same kind of techniques and camera shots and all that kind of the revolving kind of camera shots, and we even get the classic Bad Boys pose in this one, where the camera swings around our guys as they're rising up into frame, looking up at the sky. That's in here because it wouldn't be a Bad Boys film without that shot. But yeah, the new directors, this Bilal and Adil, these chaps, they have crafted a more coherent film story-wise, but the film's just lacking a little bit of the pizzazz that Michael Bay brings to films. Like I say, for all of his knocks, and they are many, he can direct the fuck out of an action shot, an action sequence, and I feel like this is just missing that. They try to emulate it. They try to emulate the look and feel of the films before, but they missed the mark a little bit, because I think they've got one eye on making a Bad Boys film, and then they've got another eye on more contemporary action films that have come out. So they kind of want to have that flavour of something like a John Wick when it comes to the action sequences. We've got kind of like, there's jiu-jitsu moves, being thrown in there, which is kind of weird when you see Will Smith, try to take it back and then, get the hooks in and then try and lock in a rear naked choke, which it goes from one shot where you see him going palm to palm with this rear naked choke, and then the very next shot where they've changed angles, he's actually got the hand behind the head, so they muck up the continuity there. But besides the fact that they've obviously taken kind of reference from the action sequences in John Wick, and it doesn't, they don't kind of have the finesse to actually let the choreography be its own thing. There's two editors on this film, which I noticed in the opening credits, and it feels at certain points like these two editors aren't very complimentary towards each other, and I don't mean that they don't like each other, it's just like their editing styles don't kind of complement, because we go from kind of snappy, choppy editing, kind of quick editing, the camera work's not like shaky cat. It's not like the Bourne films or anything like that, but there is an element of like shaking. But they cut too quickly on certain action beats, and it's like, just let the action flow. And then at other times in the film, notably like the kind of like end sequence, the end kind of battle or fight, it seems like I don't know, I could be completely off base here, but it feels like the editing technique there is the thing that makes a good action sequence is knowing the geography of where the action's taking place. And with this, it feels like there's more swooping camera move. The camera moves up through levels of a building, and it's trying to lay out the geography as the action's taking place, and that doesn't quite work. You establish the geography of the location first, and then let the action flow. But here they're kind of, they're using camera cranes, and the camera's moving and flowing from what's happening down on a ground level up onto the next floor, and then it moves up again round, and it just it feels tonally inconsistent. And that's kind of the theme of the film. It's tonally inconsistent. This film feels like it's been taken from a script for a completely different film. I feel like this was, this script's been developed for like a standalone film, and someone had it in the drawer for a while, and then when, the powers that be have actually talked Will Smith and Martin Lawrence into doing the third Bad Boys film, they're like, don't worry about the script, I've got the perfect vehicle for it. They've taken the script out, they've crossed out the names of the original characters, and they've just kind of like, penciled in Marcus and Mike into this, because it doesn't feel balanced. Like I was before I went off on a rant. It feels like they wanted to make a Bad Boys film and have that kind of humour that was in there, especially with the scenes with Joey Pantoliano, Joey Pants, as the police captain, and Mike and Marcus. But then, on the other hand, there's certain things that happen in this film which tip some characters over the edge, and it feels like a little bit more... There's a story in there that's a little bit more hard-boiled than what Bad Boys would be. So the humour against this other element that's going on, the more serious element, it kind of butts heads at one point. A character is pushed over the edge because of something that happens, and you could feel in another film that this character would go rogue. There would be more conflict and more kind of... He'd be allowed to fester a little bit more with the conflict that's going on and the anger that this character feels in another film. But because we have to keep the story moving, with it being a Bad Boys film, and you're snapping from one scene to the next, he goes from being angry and raw about something that's happened to being fine and quipping in the next scene, and then he reverts back to being angry, and it just feels tonally inconsistent. And I feel like I would have liked to have seen the more hard-boiled version of the film over what we get, because, like I say, this film is competent. It's not bad. I was expecting it to be really fucking bad. It's not bad. It's just a little bit confused in its direction, unfortunately. And like I say, I feel like it's because it feels like a film where the script hasn't been written for Will Smith and Martin Lawrence. It just feels like they've been tagged on. And like this film has a bit of a focus. It's trying to bring up ghosts of the past, and the way that it links to the characters, the Bad Boys characters, is very tenuous. Very tenuous. It's something that we're just introduced to, and I know a lot of times pass between like the second film and the third film, but it's from characters that we've never met before, and we're just... It's like there's relationships between some of the characters in this film, which the ideas are just introduced without... it would have meant more if they brought in characters from previous films. But they don't. They just, they write in new characters, and it's like, well, in the gaps between the films, this, something happened between these two, and yada yada yada, and it's the stuff that you don't see, and it's just kind of like, yeah. I mean, one of the reasons I like Die Hard with a Vengeance is because, and that was another film that was like, repurposed. Die Hard with a Vengeance started out as a film called Simon Says. And then that script was reworked to be Die Hard 3. And they kind of bolted John McClane on. But I feel like it works in that instance because the main antagonist, spoilers for Die Hard 3 if you haven't seen it, but if you haven't seen it, it's been out, 20 odd years. So, fuck off. But Jeremy Irons plays the main antagonist in that film. And they give him a fake name, and it turns out that he is actually the brother of Hans Gruber from the first film. So it immediately it raises the stakes for John McClane, because there is an element of revenge, and it becomes kind of like a personal issue at that point. There's a personal vendetta between these two characters who have never met, but because Jeremy Irons is the brother of Alan Rickman's Hans Gruber, it elevates the conflict between the two characters then. And you just don't get that feeling in this one, unfortunately. So yeah, the story's a little bit inconsistent. The actual way the film is edited and the action sequences, that feels a little bit inconsistent as well, because of the two editors, which I've already gone through. What else? Will Smith is kind of hamstrung with what he has to do because of that, you know, the stuff that's going on in the script. I feel like he could have done a little bit more. Martin Lawrence is doing the whole Martin Lawrence shtick again. Yeah, at this point now, it's kind of like he needs to hang it up, and I think they're kind of leaning towards that, because with the film is self-contained, which is good, but they have left a back door open for a fourth film, maybe a fifth film, maybe a sixth film. I feel like they've kind of seen what's happened with like Fast and the Furious, and they might want to kind of try and replicate that with how they're, you know, backdoor leading into Bad Boys 4. It's not an overt, you know, I don't know if it's been greenlit at this point or whatever, but they've definitely left the door open for Bad Boys 4, and they've done it in such a way that if they want to, they could probably leave Martin Lawrence out, but, you know, depending on his situation, I don't know if he wants to come back, if, you know, money's involved and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure it all depends on how well this film does financially, because it looks like an expensive film, but it doesn't look like a Michael Bay expensive film. So I'm sure there's, you know, this, without looking, I'm sure this film's probably playing in the ballpark of around about 100 million budget wise, although there's not been that much marketing. So I mean, marketing costs obviously push film budgets up massively, but I don't feel like I've seen too much marketing for this. I've seen a few trailers, I've seen a couple of posters, but beyond that, you know, I've not seen the massive billboards, I've not seen, you know, all of the kind of like posters on the side of buses and all that kind of shit that normally goes with a massive tentpole movie nowadays. So as long as that's kind of like been managed, I reckon, because the screening I went to, and today's Friday, it's opening day, I went to the second showing of the day, which was like 1:30, 20 to 2, something like that. And you know, there was a fair few people in there. It was in the biggest screen at the cinema I go to, and I'd say there was probably maybe about 40 people in there, which it doesn't sound like a lot, but for a Friday afternoon, for a film that hasn't really had much of a marketing push, certainly nowhere near the marketing push that Gemini Man had, the previous Will Smith film, you know, that's not too bad. So I can only imagine there's going to be a lot more people going to watch it tonight than the second showing on a Friday afternoon when most people are still at work. So what else? Anything else I really want to say? No. It's a decent. It is kind of like a throwback to those kind of mid-90s action films, for better or for worse. The plot doesn't really hold together. I feel like certain elements in this film. There's one thing in this film that I wouldn't have had in there. And that's something that comes relatively early on in the film, which motivates one of the main characters. Then something else happens a little bit later, because I was sat there thinking this film needs to be a little bit more personal. There needs to be more kind of like, they need to up the stakes. They need to up the stakes and make this, you know, make the threat more personal. To our main characters, so they actually, you know, feel like there's a legitimate threat. And then something happens and I'm like, there it is. Why is it coming now? So it's kind of like they set up the conflict, and then a little bit further down the road they set up the conflict again, and it felt a little bit redundant and needless. I was like, that's the thing that you should have had to begin with, not the shit that came before. So I feel like if they streamlined it and actually thought about it a little bit, just another draft maybe, another draft on the script. I'm fucking up my parking here while I'm having a rant. If they just had another draft on the script and streamlined it a little bit more, all of the individual elements are there to make a better film. They're just in the wrong order. So move that from later in the film up front, nix that idea completely, and then take the inner conflicts of a character, push that forward, make that the main threat, maybe dial back on the humour a little bit, and then keep the flashy whiz bang crash wallop stuff, and you would have a better film. Everything's in there, it's just in the wrong order, and I feel like that could be down to the I know these two directors have got a couple of films under the belt already, but I feel like a more seasoned director, and I'll be upfront, I don't know the rest of their work. I just had a quick look on IMDb. I can see the next film is Beverly Hills Cop 4. They've done a couple of stuff, a few films earlier. I've not seen any of them that I didn't recognise any of them, but I just feel like a more assured hand behind the camera, like, maybe the John Wick directors, Chad Stahelski or David Leitch. I feel like if those two guys were behind the camera, if they were making this film instead of the John Wick film, then it might have been a little bit more assured. But that said, it exceeded my expectations, but I did go in with a very low bar. So take that for what you will. If you like the Bad Boys films, you're probably going to like this. There's nothing in there that will make you dislike these films. You'll probably enjoy it just as much as what you have done before. It's, again, not being a massive Will Smith fan, it's one of his better films, but that's not saying much from my point of view. So yeah, Bad Boys for life. Bad Boys, what are you gonna do? Decent looking film, a little bit muddled plot wise and action sequence wise with the editing. Impossibly beautiful women and handsome men in the film, and throwback to 90s action cinema, if not quite reaching the dizzying heights of some of the best examples that have come before it. Check it out, let me know what you think, and I've decided I'm not going watching Seberg. That's going to be a home viewing. I can't be bothered going watching that. What's coming up next, I don't know, but I'll be back with another video soon after my next cinema trip. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time. Bye.